The Behemoth Brewing Company presents the Department of Conversation with Pat Brittington. Behemoth, give me something hoppy.
Hello, Tim Batt.
Give me something hoppy is a good slogan for a beer company.
It is actually. They've got several of them, but that's one that we seem to be going with at the moment. Give me something
I like it.
hoppy. And that's a friend of mine, Damien, who works in radio down here in Dunedin, and he did the lines for me because that's the kind of voice you need to have. So it's cool. Yeah.
He's got great pipes for it. There's no doubt.
Man. So thanks for joining us. This is Fireside Chats. Fireside Chats. And I can see you've got your fire in the background. I need to make a bit of a wider shot for mine. Hang on.
I've not only prepared a fire, but I've got a whole log cabin scenario here, replete with rain gently tapping on the window behind me to give it that lovely homely feel.
Very cool. And for people who are just joining us for the first time, no matter where you are watching us, if you are watching the live stream, you can participate, communicate, chat away, and we can share and talk about people's comments that do come in. But also the reason we're doing this, and I know I've explained this each time I've done it, but I was doing late night talkback as a talkback host when the Christchurch Earthquake happened. And I sort of know that sometimes in times of stress or times of unknownness, it's these times of night where people are kind of going, oh crap, what's going on? You know, what are we doing? What's happening? You know, what's this all about? And it's the times when you're at home, maybe by yourself, or maybe the kids are in bed. And so you're now thinking about it that you might need some company. And that's sort of what we're doing. We're kind of just going, well, let's hang out for a little bit and have a kind of chat about nothing in particular and keep some company. So thanks, Tim. Thanks for coming on and having a chat with us. How are you?
Great to be back with you, Pat, even if virtually this time. I'm good, man. Quite an interesting sort of a lockdown situation, I guess. By the way, I can't hear my own mic, so I'm going to assume it's loud enough. I can pump it up a little bit if need be, but you just let me know.
No, you're good, bro.
Because I've actually got an impending baby on the way, due in the middle of September. So I'm doing all this stuff in lockdown to get ready for that and simultaneously try to figure out sort of how it's going to affect the actual getting the baby out, but in a hospital.
Now, sorry to ask the stupid and obvious question, but we are talking like about a real baby. You know, some people go, I've got a baby on the way. What is it? Oh, building a house. It's going to be, you know, we're talking
it's a
little human
baby that my wife is currently carrying in her uterus.
It's in the oven. It's baking at the moment, is it?
It's done, man. It's a big baby, I reckon.
Dude, and that's number one for you, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
So tell the whānau. Hi, mate, come in close. Tell the whānau about what's going on in your world and with your mind thinking about, a little thing on the way.
Man, I'm very much a take things as they come sort of a dude. And I guess this is the ultimate test if your life approaches and life philosophies hold true. And, I'm trying to surround myself with the good intel and getting a lot of good advice, but I'm feeling good about it. I'm excited, I really am. I'm sure it's going to be very, very tough. Everyone sort of gives you a heads up on that. And certainly sleep deprivation's no one's best friend. But what could be more cool than bringing some life into the world, eh?
My sort of assumption of how a stand-up comic works, late nights, this sort of thing, getting around, I would think perhaps a comic would be quite well set up if anyone was going to be for sort of sleep deprivation and late nights, early mornings and figuring stuff out. I don't know. I could be wrong, but you might have a little something there that is an advantage because of what you've done and what you do, maybe.
Certainly had a lot of practice, but well, yeah, I mean, look, there's going out and having 3 beers and making a room full of people laugh and then getting to sleep in a little bit. And then there's having to attend to a child every hour on the hour. Yeah, probably 2 different ball games, but yeah, potentially a little bit more prepared for the sleep deprivation than most. I also kind of hate sleep. I'm not a good sleeper. I never have been. Yeah.
I'm the opposite. I'm one of my favorite things in the world is an afternoon nap, actually. Probably shows my age as well, but I just fucking love it. Love getting in the I've got one of those big lazy boy chairs and just pushing it back and then and I do like the 10-minute power nap, drift off. 10 minutes later, I'm back and just feel energized and invigorated.
That sounds totally blissful, and I wish I could do it. but I've tried a few times to do that. Like periodically, I'll try to break the cycle and see if I can get into the nap thing, and I always just end up feeling absolutely rat shit when I wake up.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Yeah,
so,
it seems to be either people hate it or love it. And I, I know people who can't nap. I'm like, oh, if you're tired, go for an afternoon nap. And they're like, I can't. If I do that, I'll feel groggy and shit for the rest of the day.
That's me.
No, I spent probably 10 or 12 years sort of working overnights though. When I started in radio working for More FM, it was midnight till 6, and then went around the traps for a while. And then when I was a student working at petrol stations, it was the midnight shift. And then when I kind of went back to Talkback, it was the late night shifts and the overnight shifts. And so that was a huge part of my life for quite a long time.
What I've heard from, I think my wife said this actually, because she's a doctor, so she's done like a hospital round, and you have to do a period of time when you're doing shift work for that.
Yep.
And there seems to be this thing where if you break your body clock once, you sort of can get into that zone of napping quite easily. When I was doing breakfast radio, actually, I produced breakfast radio for a little while, and those hours are insane. By the way, actually, I've got to ask you if you're going for Duncan's job now that there's a seat to be filled. Surely you got your hand up for that one.
Oh, I'm sure I haven't.
But it messes with your mind doing those hours, but it does allow you, I think, to a far more easy nap during the day. This is probably the one time in my life when I could nap.
Yeah, I know people. I mean, I did breakfast radio for a while as well. I just always seem to have been one of those people. Like even when I was working in schools doing some teaching, I'd come home at 3 o'clock or 3:30 or 4 o'clock. I'd crash on the couch for 10 minutes, and then I'd be right for the rest of the day. It just seems to be something I've always done.
It's a superpower, dude.
It is a superpower. In fact, it's one of the reasons I knew when it was time for me to stop doing radio, because it was going away. And I was like, it was becoming more difficult to stay up overnights and that kind of stuff. And that was sort of one of the driving factors. Yes, you were going to say, sorry.
Fair enough. I just want to know what's your lockdown experience been? I'm very interested to know, especially people in different bits of the country, like what have you been doing to fill the days? How are you finding it? What's the mood in the area?
My days haven't changed all that much, to be honest, because I work from home. And because since I mean, in fact, you are one of the genuine friends of the show. This is the third time you've been on. Not that this is the normal show. And the first time you were on was when you were in Dunedin about a week before the first lockdown. You may have even been the very last podcast, or the second to last podcast we did in person in the old studio before we basically weren't allowed back there. Right. So that was very different because I had a studio in town and I would be toing and froing and I'd be going in, and then you don't want to really turn home into an office. So even when you don't have a podcast to do, you go in and you work out of this, out of your studio. But since last lockdown and right now being in my own at home studio, bringing everything home, working from home, it's not that nothing's different, but compared to people who go and work 9 to 5 somewhere else, my life hasn't changed that much. So I'm actually filling my time with the stuff that I was doing. I'm actually a little bit busier. I've connected with potentially a new client who wants to figure out how to now provide for people who are at home when he's not, when they normally come into his location, but now they're at home. How can we get to them at home? So yeah, it's a mixture of that. I've also got one of my kids with me, and the other one was here for the first week of lockdown. So it's
how old's the kid that you've got with you now?
She is 15. So I've got a 17-year-old who lives with her mum. I've got a 15-year-old who lives with me, and there's a 12-year-old who goes between.
Gotcha.
And so the 12-year-old was with me last week, with mum this week, and depending on what happens this weekend, will be back with me next week. So I've also tried to do a little, stuff every day. We were just hanging out as well. We used to homeschool way back in the day, way back when we were a single unit, and I kind of know the benefits that can come with homeschooling, and if you really get onto it and really knuckle down, you can get all your schoolwork, the kids can, in like a morning. And then you can have afternoons to do whatever you like. So I've sort of, without needing to sort of kind of put under the thumb for that, I've been trying to work around, encouraging them to get stuff done. The first few days didn't do anything because it was only a 3-day lockdown, and we were like, let's just see what happens. Checking that there's a music class tomorrow, period 1. So make sure you're up by 8:30 and that sort of thing. So sort of a mix. My regular job continues on, not doing things like school drop-offs and stuff, but are picking up more schooling stuff at home. You know what I'm saying?
Can you tell me a bit about the homeschooling thing? Because I'm real interested in it. Because I formerly was a dude who it's a very easy thing to mock kids who were homeschooled. Like it's low hanging fruit for a comedian, I tell you what. But the older I've got and the sort of less faith I've probably got in the public school system, the more I'm like, man, maybe there's something to it. I've got a really good friend of mine who was homeschooled, and she's awesome. She's like the only person I think I know in person who was homeschooled. Yeah, awesome. I was. Well, I think there's a stereotype that homeschool people come out all freaky and a bit weird, a bit off, a bit not quite socialized correctly. But what was your experience of having your kids through a homeschooled system?
Yeah, we'll do all that. Let's, as we're doing that, also say hello to some of our lovely people who are joining us. James is saying g'day. We got Kim on there as well, who's actually saying hello to James. We're here as well, Kim. Don't have to ignore just us as well. A couple of other people saying hello along the way. Hello from Colin. C-O-L-O-N. Colin. Anyway, homeschooling. Well, I probably have to take a little half step back first of all, because homeschooling is done by hippies and religious people. Primarily.
Exactly. See, this is where the stereotype comes from.
Yeah. And our reason for homeschooling was our eldest child between 4 and 5 was diagnosed with epilepsy. And kind of half a year or so to go before the eldest was due to start school, we went down the medical path and got drugs, and the drugs turned this child into a demon, like literally off the walls demon. And we were like, fuck me, this is not going to work. So what we actually did was we put school on the shelf, and we went, let's figure out the medication first. Let's figure out the health stuff first, and let's worry about school later. Let's just prepare to homeschool. And so that we can get the medical stuff sorted out first, and then the schooling can, kids don't have to start school till they're 6, right? That's by law, that's what it is. So if we just prepare for homeschooling, then we can cover that base, but also get the irony is that before the eldest was 5, we'd basically sorted out the meds and all that kind of stuff. But because we'd prepped for homeschooling, we sort of just decided to stick with it. I think that's probably a fair, if you spoke to the kid's mum, she may have a slightly different angle on it, but that's pretty much my take on it. We prepared for it, so we kind of decided to stay with it, and that was really not the only reason, because you can see lots of benefits in it as well. And that's what we went with it, and it was great. It was really good. And our kid, every parent, and you'll experience this, probably every uncle and aunt as well, thinks that their little angel is God's gift to everything. So me saying that our kids appeared to be quite smart probably doesn't mean much to many people. But, you could, when you give your kids attention one-on-one for a good period of time, or you get them involved in, levels of reading and stuff that they wouldn't get in a classroom, you can pick up that they're, let's just say they're above average, whether it's better than that or whatever. And our kids seem to thrive. And eventually the school thing started. So kids are at school now. And the youngest, I don't think, was ever officially homeschooled, although I think we were still homeschooling when she was 4, so she kind of joined in. But she was at school at 5. What I experienced was, when I actually can't remember which one of the 2 older ones it was, but we got told by the teacher after they went to school that, don't worry about it, she's fine, right in the middle, she's average. It's no problems at all, it's average. And we were like, yeah, we're smart enough to know that we've seen things in this kid that they should be doing better than average. And there's a tangent that started us down a whole new line of investigation as to, how people learn and what they learn and what schools need to provide them to get the best out of them. And what our homeschooling experience probably did was gave us the opportunity to know really well what our kids were capable of, which then gave us a chance to really direct and question the education system and how that was providing for them to hopefully tailor it for them better, to a point that it's her business. I'm no longer with their mother, obviously, but I won't go into her business, but she's taken a path in academia actually looking around how kids learn in schools. I won't go into her business, it's her conversation to have, but kind of their experience with homeschooling, I think it would be fair to say, has led their mother into a path of going, I need, there are kids in school who need more. And I think it would be fair to say that we identified that through our kids being homeschooled, seeing what they were capable of, and then seeing them in the schooling system going, this is not providing for them. Long-winded answer, but that was our experience.
Josh, you just said, honestly, not locking your kid into 8-hour days, living by the bell sounds like it would have its benefits. That's sort of where I'm coming from as well. Because like, I don't know, I think I saw this on, I'm a big fan of conspiratorial YouTube videos. So I probably saw it on one of those at some point. But I had heard somewhere that the modern day school system was originally based on like the prison system. That's sort of where they got the blueprint for it. And there is a lot of similarities, right? You're packing everyone in, everything's by the bell, everything's super supervised and hyper structured. And I get why the system is set up like that from a resource point of view, because we have decided as a society, this is how much money we want to dole out to education, and it's not quite enough. So it's like, okay, well, here's the system that can accommodate that amount of money for this many kids. But I don't think that it is a very child-centric, or what you were talking about, putting the potential of each child first, And so I think there could be some benefits for parents having a big focus there. Of course, there's undoubtedly trade-offs, and it's also not for everyone. Like I say this, I imagine it is an incredible amount of work, and I would be tempted to say I'm probably not prepared to make the trade-offs in my life to do it. Like, did you feel you had to make a lot of sacrifices to actually do the homeschooling?
Probably, to be fair, the kid's mother took the weight of the homeschooling rather than me. It was a time in my life where I was sort of working 3 or 4 or 5 different jobs. Even if one of the jobs was working with Theatre Sports Auckland, which would only be 2 gigs a month, but adding them all up, there was probably probably 5 different lines of income. So to be fair, the brunt of the responsibility, but not through anything other than I didn't have as many hours. That's all, was taken on board by their mother. But I, to be honest with you, I'm probably the wrong person to, like, if I was a solo parent and I had the same kind of space and time, I'm, being dyslexic and not being particularly, admin orientated. I'm onto that, by the way, IRD. You'll get it soon. I think I think that I'm the wrong person for it as well. But it suited her to drive it, and it suited the kids. And to be honest, I don't know. It sounds weird. I don't want to talk about my ex, not only because I don't want to talk her business. It's her business.
Yeah, I get
different
it. Yeah.
lives. But the stuff she's gone on to kind of in academia is actually could be really important for a bunch of kids. If people out there are wondering why their kids at school don't seem to be doing as well as perhaps they think they should, just investigate a term called twice exceptionality. If you investigate twice exceptionality, I think there'd be a lot of parents in New Zealand who would be surprised. To explain it, twice exceptionality is basically people who are gifted in one area and have a learning disability or difficulty in another. So a kid might be incredibly smart or whatever it is, like a high IQ, but they might be dyslexic or something. And what happens is you get the highs from the giftedness being dragged down by the lows of the learning difficulty, and it makes them look like they're kind of average. They're often those kids that never do any work and fly throughs with B's and C's. That sort of thing. And you always go, oh, they're the kids who get the reports that say, oh, could do so much better if they applied themselves. Just thinking about all my reports as they
that's me.
hang up my whole life.
Every report I ever got was those exact words.
And look, this is not a criticism of our schooling system, because to be honest with you, 30 kids in certainly a primary school classroom and one teacher, you get 1/30 of the attention. So you should.
But I think that's the issue, right? It's not the job that the teachers are doing, which I think is, by and large, from my observation, pretty fantastic given the resources. It's the way that the system's set up at the moment. It's my father-in-law's just retired recently from teaching for like 30 years, 35 years maybe. And so he's got this great kind of longitudinal view of secondary school education in this country. And the whole sweep of NCEA. And it just strikes me as one of those things where there was such a lot of, and I guess like he and I are very politically aligned. We're both quite left-leaning dudes. But there was such a hiss and a roar when NCEA was first introduced. And it just feels like all of the problems that were being spoken about when it first came in and people were protesting have come to fruition and they're big problems. It's kind of frustrating when you're kind of do a I told you so moment, but who cares, because the actual result is kids are missing out on high quality education standards.
Yeah, like I told you millions of people would starve to death. It's like, actually, the problem is millions of people have starved to death, not that you were right.
Yeah, probably the gloating bit we can leave at the door. But
but the whole thing,
it was predictable,
I
guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, the schooling, it's difficult to criticize the schooling because they only are able to operate in a certain way, in a certain structure. But thinking about providing for the kids. So what, for example, it's not even that we're able to do, because sometimes it doesn't even work, but at least as parents, we have the knowledge that this is what our child needs to get the best out of them. Now, that school, if you don't do it, we will hold you accountable. At least we've got that knowledge. It doesn't mean it always works, because schools are still, and you imagine if every parent in the class went to the school like that, that'd be like the world's worst nightmare. And you do come across like the soccer mum sometimes, or the theatre mum, like my child. But it's like, you also have to be an advocate. And if you're not going to be a fucking advocate for your kids, then who are you ever going to be an advocate for?
100%. Hey, Tom. Nice to see you here, bud. Tom's, I think he was watching today, but Tom's been helping out and watching my live streaming show that I've been doing since lockdown, which I've resurrected for a second season now that we're back indoors.
There you go. Let's just bring him up. There you go. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom.
Yeah. So for you, I mean, have you had all sorts of friends and family and stuff basically trying to give you advice on parenting yet? Has that started?
I don't think he'd mind me blowing up his spot on this, but you'd probably know who David Cormack is.
Mm-hmm.
Political commentator and PR extraordinaire in Wellington. Dave and I have been mates for ages, because he and my older brother have been friends since high school. And I was actually talking to Cormac today, and he reiterated a piece of advice he gave me a little while ago when he found out I was having a baby, which is when people come around in the first 6 months, they're only allowed to stay for half an hour. And it's my job as the dude to get them out of there, and everyone has to bring a frozen meal to gain entry, which is both quintessentially David Cormack, but also a very good rule for having a newborn in the house, I think.
Yeah, totally. When I've experienced sort of having a young one and having a group of friends, like a certain friend be responsible for organizing all the other friends to cook meals and stuff and bring them around for those, like not cooking at all for the first 2 weeks to 4 weeks. I get that. People who are having kids, and I'm not suggesting you are asking me, but who do say, what's your one piece of advice? What's your one piece of advice,
Pat? Now I've asked.
Thanks for asking. I wasn't going to say anything, but if you're going to drag it out of me, then I always say, don't just read one book, because people get the parenting books and they read a book. Don't just read one book. That's the only thing I reckon, because you'll read one book and think that's the be all and end all, and that's how you do it. But then there's another book that gives you much better advice. So if you are a book reader who likes to go, oh, look, if one is,
I'm not, this is the problem,
just read one.
I'm not a book reader, so I was counting on the fact that I could get away with just reading one book. But the one book that I am in the middle of reading does seem to be a good one.
Yeah, that's good.
I've forgotten the author's name. I wonder if it's sitting. Oh, it must be in the kitchen, actually.
Is it in your log cabin?
Yes, it's just by the Whistling Stove Kettle. The book is called Smart Mothering, and it's almost like a academic critique of all the sort of wisdom on parenting, and it's looking at from a scientific basis, teasing out which bits can be supported and which bits can't. Nice. And my wife read it very, very quickly because she's cleverer than me, or more apt to read books. And she said that it's like a lot of it is quite commonsensical stuff, but a big takeaway that she got is the damaging effect of looking at a screen mobile phone while
Yep.
you've got a very young child, which makes intrinsic sense. But there's like an old psychology experiment, which I am going to like half remember, where they were measuring the effect of when mothers don't respond to their children. And I don't think you could even replicate this study now because it's very unethical. But they had conducted it, I think 60s or 70s, and they got these babies to be with their mothers, and they were observing the mothers, and the mothers were instructed to not respond in any way, shape, or form to their babies. So the babies would try and make the mothers smile and laugh and engage with them, and the mothers would stay stone-faced, and it really distresses babies like quite instantly. And that is effectively what we're doing when we're on our phones. We've got this like dead-eyed stare, this emotionless thing. We're disengaged with the baby, and the baby may well be trying to, get a reaction out of us, interact with us. And if we're on the phone, we're just totally oblivious to it and giving it this emotionless response. And it's incredibly distressing for a baby. So that was a good takeaway. So I would need to be very like cognizant of, actually putting my phone somewhere else.
I didn't, I guess because of the age of my kids. I mean, we've all got the smartphones now, but that sort of started about 2008. So I guess I've got, as I said, 15 and 17, that wasn't really around, wasn't so much of an issue there. But one of the things we were very aware of is kids watching screens, kids watching TV, and as much as you can, kind of keeping it off them until they're 2. And I know that sounds maybe that sounds a bit middle class, first world problems to some people.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but
I can as well,
Yeah, and there's I'm not going to remember now because it's such a long time ago, but I'm pretty sure there's pretty good research that says, evidence of things like TV and screens from 0 to 2 can be damaging, but a certain kind of educational from 2 to 5 can be massively improving in, the synapses and how the brain fires and that kind of stuff. So if you're intentional about it as well, we all hear about people using screens as babysitters. I think screens are part of our world these days. And if you're intentional as to how you use them, then they can be a tool. And if you're not, they can be the devil.
Yeah. But also little kids appear to be very resilient. So, pretty hard to mess them up with the TV, perhaps. I read a book years ago called Remotely Controlled, which was, it might be, I don't know how like well reputed the book is, but it was written by a guy who's got a PhD, so we'll put some stock in it. Sure. And he was going through, all of the different sociological and psychological effects of television, and it was pretty nightmarish. The one thing I remember in particular from that was they managed to do a study in Fiji, because I think Fiji was one of the last sort of easily observable countries for academics to see for TV to get into. All right. And so they compared a whole bunch of crime statistics and increased the basically rates of awful crimes, assaults, sexual crimes by a huge amount. And they suspect heavily that it was the influence of American television programming that came in. Wow. And everyone gobbled it up. Yeah, really awful stuff. The other weird thing was about the effects that, which might not be as relevant now because they were talking about CRT screens, which aren't around anymore. Yep. But the state that your brain goes into when you watch TV for more than 5 minutes, like your brainwaves change. You go into like a sort of a, slightly comatose state of awakeness, which is
like talking about CRTs in particular, like to do with the flickering lines. Is that
I'm not sure I can't remember if it was that or just the fact that you were kind of putting all your attention on a thing, in which case we're still screwed. Doesn't matter if you got LCD or OLED or whatever. But the bit that blew me away with that is the implications for advertising. So it's putting you into the state where you're kind of less defended consciously. Your consciousness is less defended, your defenses are down, and then they just periodically throw a bunch of ads at you to go and buy some shit, and all the ads are like playing on your emotions and throwing you images of babies and telling you to buy a fridge, and you're like, oh fuck, okay, sweet, cool, I gotta do this.
I saw some research once, I don't know if this is true or this is a wives' tale, but about how TV and those advertising breaks and those length of times, like between advertising breaks, is one of the factors for a generation, maybe mine, maybe Gen X's, for screwing up our attention span to being sort of similar to those sort of 7 to 13 minute breaks, and we couldn't do it beyond. And I was thinking about that the other day, and I was thinking, God, if that did that to Gen Xers, imagine what the millennials and Gen Zs are going through with TikToks and stuff. Just 60 seconds is about it, and there's nothing else.
Do you reckon if that was because I agree with you, it's a very scary thing to think about, and the implications are kind of terrifying. But do you think if that was the case, we would see something quite dramatically going wrong by this point, right? If it had a very strong effect. I think it's definitely got an effect on this generation and on my generation, with our media consumption habits and now being glued to our mobiles and stuff. But I think if it was going to create like mass issues, would we be able to observe that yet?
Don't know. Think about so if we went back to, so we're looking at the Gen Z and millennials together at the moment. They're kind of a crossover, much of a muchness, although they may take offense to me saying that. Gen X is definitely, a separation. Then there's the boomers. If you look at the boomers, thinking about television in the maybe even 50s and 60s, very, very different. Do we see things different between those that you could relate back to their media consumption? I mean, do they have better attention spans, the ones who are still alive, I guess? Do they treat it more like, I think one of the things that you see in this generation, maybe because it's accurate or maybe because it's become infotainment, is far, far, far more discerning as to whether you trust or don't trust a news source. Whereas like maybe in my father's day and age, the 6 o'clock news came in, that was absolute gospel no matter what. Now in an age of fake news, in an age of, consuming, as they talk about, morsel-sized pieces of content, are they more discerning? Are they more, are they better at discerning bullshit? Is there more bullshit? Yeah, there probably is, but what's the difference between how they consume their media in those generations? Like maybe going the difference between X and Y is not so much, but what about Y and Boomer? The differences between those two groups, because it's got a gap of X in between to actually see the differences.
That comparison thing is interesting. Have you heard of a guy called Yaron Lanier?
Doesn't ring a bell.
He's a tech dude. I think he's about like in his late 50s now. He might even be 60 years old. He's got dreadlocks, white guy with dreadlocks. Incredible dude. Gives a lot of speeches. He made a lot of money in tech. He's like a tech dude. He's an IT guy from way back when. He's kind of regarded by some as the father of VR. He is a staunch advocate for as many people as possible completely getting off of social media for a really specific reason. He thinks it's really critical that we have a large enough sample size of people who are not on social media so that we can actually measure the effects, because social media has become such a pervasive social norm that the concern is it may fuck all of us up, but because we're all going through that, we actually can't detect it because there's no out group, there's no control group to compare ourselves to, which is an argument that I'd never seen before, but is super, resonates with me, and it's interesting.
It's almost like you need a group in society to sort of take one for the team and stay off social media, if for no other reason, to help the whole of society, see how social media is treating the rest of society. See
what's happening to us, who are on it. Just on the journalism bent as well. There's a great piece in Spin-Off at the moment about this concept of post-journalism, off the back of there's a Russian media theorist called Andre Mur, who's just come out with a new book about that, which looks super interesting. So if anyone's interested in that kind of field of media and journalism and what's going on with that, the article is really good. And if you like that, it's probably a good book for you too to read.
Yeah,
I hate books.
Yeah, and you only read one, so you read your book for this year. It's the parenting one with all the answers.
I'm only a third way through it too.
It's also freaky to think about how fast things are moving. A friend of mine once said, it was probably in the 90s, and he went, think about this. Things have never moved as fast as they're moving right now, and they'll never move this slowly again. And I was talking to someone just today actually about how 20 years for someone as old and shitty as me it does actually feel like that. I've got to that age where I'm like, man, I can remember 1999 New Year's Eve like it was yesterday, standing on top of the More FM building in central Auckland, trying to watch the Sky Tower it feels like yesterday. And you start to go, gosh, I remember, when I was like my kid's age, I would never watch a movie that was 20 or 25 years old, because that would have been from the 1960s sort of thing.
Yeah.
And who would watch that? But now we've got, like things like, Forrest Gump, that movie is like 30 years old now. And
The
all
Matrix.
the kids are
The Matrix
Yeah.
in my head is this very like futuristic sci-fi, very modern film. It's over 20 years old now.
Yeah. So it's a very, and like hearing my 15-year-old who loves music and plays the guitar and ukulele and all this kind of stuff, hearing her sing all these songs from the 80s and stuff. And I'm like, where did you learn that? And they're like, oh, it's Spotify, because it's everywhere, because there's a riff in this song from this song. And I linked to that song and I found it and I like it. So I learned it, looking it up on it. Like, I talk about my I think it was my 12-year-old asking me if I learned to juggle on YouTube. Dad, how do you learn how to juggle? I just taught myself. Did you learn off YouTube? Not having a concept of the world without YouTube. Saying I've been juggling since the 1990s or 1980s, whatever.
It would be very hard for someone under the age of, say, like 20. It'd be very hard to even think about what the world was like before the internet, though, because it's changed everything. Like, I'm only 30. I just turned 34 last week. But I have a concept. Like, my childhood was pre-internet. Some people had it couldn't do much as well. The few people who had it didn't really do much. But for anyone, especially who's like under the age of, say, 15 now, to even think about what the world was like would be a very tricky concept, which is so strange because historically that is so recent.
Yeah. Whereas I'm a decade or so older than you, and I have that transition. So I remember Dad getting his first VCR player. We had a house with no computer in it. We had a black and white TV in the house, but that's because my parents wouldn't upgrade a TV. It was the spare one in the spare room. It wasn't in the main lounge sort of thing. That when you turned it off, it did that black screen thing where it went down to a single white dot, like you see, and I remember getting my first computer. I got my first own computer when I left school. I was 21 when I went flatting and got a computer and had it in the flat I was in with a modem that went.
Hell yeah!
And we got on IRC chat rooms because you couldn't certainly do graphics or anything. So I think, I'm not saying I'm lucky. Everyone would love to be 10 years younger than they really are, I think, unless you're a 20-year-old. But I went through that life of having to sit at the bus stop after cricket practice, either with a book or just sitting and waiting. I say to my kids often, you guys need to learn how to be bored. You actually need to learn how to be bored. I remember sitting on a Sunday, waiting for a bus from Central Auckland and missing the one by 5 minutes and having to wait an hour for the next one. So like, oh, well, just got to wait for an hour. Don't have this to play, some kind of game to keep me entertained.
The whole concept of having heard it referred to recently as a pacifier for people of all ages that's on you. So no matter what's if you're slightly perturbed, stressed, bored, something's not gone right, something like, I know I do it 100%. My instant reaction to any one of those situations will be pulling out my phone and going on Twitter or Reddit or something like that. But Pat, this has quickly descended into two men yelling about
get off my lawn.
Why don't we try and guess what's coming next down the pipe? What do you think the future holds? Tech-wise.
Do you mean, are you tech-wise?
Let's ignore the climate collapse for a second. Let's pretend like that's not happening.
I think that obviously after we've all been microchipped with our vaccinations, I'm now fully magnetic, which is a really helpful thing because I now know where my keys are at all times. They're always just stuck. They're just stuck to my thigh at all times. That's where my keys are. What's coming next? It's a really, what I find it a really interesting question. And let me tell you a little story as to why. I remember working in radio in the first decade of this century, so 20 noughts. And everyone was talking about, satellite radio, DAB radio, satellite radio, Sirius FM, yada, yada, yada. And I was really strongly of the opinion that New Zealand's too small for satellite radio. And my theory was always, you probably need a good 10 or 15 years of car sales for enough secondhand cars to get into the marketplace to make those, those satellite radios be worth it. And by then, and I don't think I was ever quite onto it enough to say the internet will be doing it, but I'd be like, something else will be coming along. So when you say what's next, and that's what's happened. We never got satellite radio in New Zealand. It's gone straight to, our cell phones carrying stuff on the internet. We listen to things that way. So when you say what's next, I think there's a kind of a two-part question. It's what's next in technology, but then what's next in New Zealand may not reflect necessarily what's next in technology around the world because of our population size and where we are. For something to really come and take over and take off, it needs to be almost an essential. I mean, I was just thinking today, I nearly tweeted it. I didn't. I was going to be like, isn't it interesting how quickly Clubhouse died? There was this new thing that came out last year, Clubhouse, and everyone was doing conversations online on their phones, and it was the big thing, and everyone was getting into it, and then all of a sudden, no one's talking about it or using it. I mean, did you get involved in Clubhouse, and have you done it in the last 3 months?
I never got on it. I sort of observed it from afar. My understanding was I'm sure there was like a broad swath of people on there, but it kind of got picked up in particular by people who sort of got banned on Twitter. There was a lot of conservatives and stuff who really gravitated towards it because it had a bit more of a lenient structure. Is he the My Pillow guy?
Yeah, I've got to request him with him for a podcast. Yes,
really?
Yeah, I heard back from them yesterday. Shit. It's not confirmed, but I've got a request in. It'll be amazing. So, so technology,
just for 1 second, it is bizarre. Yeah. There's a lot of things you could say are bizarre about what's going on at the moment, but the fact that a guy who's the CEO of a company called My Pillow having such a platform on one particular side of politics in America at the moment it's crack up, to be honest. I wish it was consequence free, and obviously it's not, but just looking at it objectively, as an observer, it's freaking funny. There's a lot of stuff that's just very funny, very objectively funny.
Look, ever since I've done sort of talk radio and talk back and that kind of stuff, I've always, one of my driving passions, and I'm doing something at the moment where I'm trying to launch a new debate series based on something I did a decade ago. And it's always been one of the things I really like doing is understanding why people believe what they believe. It's not even necessarily that I need to agree with you or anything like that. I just really like to understand why. Why do you think this? And that's one of the reasons cool. I would love to have him on, because like, why? I mean, like, 63 courts say you're wrong. The justice system says you're. Why do you believe this? I really want to kind of flesh that out. So I hope. I mean, if they see this, it's not like I'm trying to get him on to do anything nefarious. I really would like to. Have
an honest conversation with the dude.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And just be like, why? But why? It's like when I do love talking to flat earthers. And one of the reasons we're starting up this debate series was we were going to do a flat earth debate, which probably won't happen now because the flat earthers have got wind of me being like a normal, sane, rational person. But anyway, which is no good for that world.
Hi, Dumb Jezza, by the way. Dumb Jezza said hi.
Oh, hi all. But I still would like to know why. Why. I had a podcast with a guy called Stephen Lewandowski. If people haven't heard of him, you probably haven't, but go back into my podcast.
I know who he is.
Look him up. And he's a scientist, and he did research into climate change as to why.
Okay, I was thinking of a different guy. Sorry.
Stephen Lewandowski, yeah. He did research, and you might be thinking Lewandowski, the guy in America who's a political guy. Yeah, no, different guy. Same surname, different guy. And I had him on, and he was talking about this research that he did in climate change. And the research that he did was looking at why, when people are presented with scientific evidence, do they still not believe it? When they're given the answer, when they say, what is this color? And you say it's blue, and then they go, here is the evidence why it's blue. And they go, no, it's green. And then when you
I could give you an answer for that, though, I reckon.
Go.
Because there's scientific information that I get presented with that I'm very skeptical of. It's because I think science has been used to prove all sorts of things that are both true and false over time. Like there are good examples of science, the scientific method being used to sort. I guess I'm trying to think of a really golden example, and I can't really. The closest I'm getting is when they were first figuring out if cigarettes more, nicotine was addictive, actually. Yep. So forget the cancer stuff, but like, was it classed as addictive? And there was a whole lot of very well paid and very well respected and well regarded people from a scientific background presenting evidence, because they were, funded to basically on behalf of these tobacco companies, that nicotine was not an addictive substance. in the way that we classify chemical addiction, which of course we now know to be false. There's just like, an example. I think there's more. I don't know them off the top of my head, but
I think that I know, and I'm paraphrasing his research probably badly, but I think it was kind of couched, as I understand it, as in when they were presented with unequivocal evidence like, for example, now you wouldn't question the evidence around tobacco if you were presented with that today. No, I'm paraphrasing. Go look for my podcast. Let him say it to yourself. But he said they do a thing, and he called it motivated cognition. So if you have an idea or an answer, and this is you, and you've got this answer, and you've got this path to it, and someone puts a block in the path, which is the evidence to disprove the answer, what they just do is they just go around a different way to get to the same answer. So they just figure out a different way to get to the same answer no matter what. I mean, flat earth is a perfectly good example. They used to say, the flat earthers used to say, just have a look. There's no direct flights or anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere between anywhere in South America. And all you got to do is go Sydney to Santiago, and there's flights every week.
It's such a funny piece of evidence.
Well, because of the shape of how they designed the flat earthers. And so now you present them that with that evidence, and they come up with other ideas like, well, actually, that's because there's hurricane winds in the upper atmosphere that carry the plane faster than it can go. It's just they find a different path to get to the same answer. And look, amazing. I'm not saying this to kind of take the piss out of flat earthers, because I still have that genuine desire to understand why they believe it. But yeah, when people get presented with evidence kind of irrefutably disputing their claim, they either accept that or they find another path to the same answer, which is the motivated cognition.
So this is sort of tangentially related to what we're talking about, but I think it's relevant. I have, for about the last 2 years, been trying to supplant into my consciousness at all times this new philosophy to walk around with, which is just whatever I'm kind of doing and information I'm processing and ways that I'm going about my life, just inserting could be wrong though at all times, just like, but also could be wrong. And I honestly think it's got quite a lot to do with me doing psychedelic substances like magic mushrooms and LSD, because it genuinely makes you quite humble to the nature of what you think is absolutely true, and be just like more open-minded to connective pieces. I don't know, the way that you assemble things can go down different paths. There's a lot of fantastic research about how psychedelics are quite helpful for people who have either problems with addiction or psychological issues which kind of mimic the pathology of addiction. So things like compulsive disorders where the same thought pattern just cycles in your head around and around, which is very unhelpful and negative. Psychedelics can be very effective at breaking those loops and allowing you to kind of get that train off that track and jump off.
PTSD as well. I've heard research that's saying towards PTSD, how helpful they can be.
I think it's a similar mechanism. There's a book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind, which talks about this a little bit. And there's kind of a new emerging model, which some psychologists are adopting to do with this. How psychedelics give people who suffer PTSD an ability to experience the memory of the thing that is triggering their trauma minus that heightened emotional state at the time.
Right,
and it's through doing that without the emotional baggage of it that you can start to redress it and start to unpack it and actually find some way of coping with it, and not solving it, that's probably the wrong word, but making some peace with it and accepting it in your life. But I just think if there's one thing that the world needs at the moment, it's more humility wholesale. I think people are like, we've gone really unhumble, particularly in our beliefs, and I'm utterly convinced that psychedelics could do a lot for the planet at the moment and for our species. And I think that one way that would manifest is just people being a lot more willing to say, this is what I think at the moment, but I am very willing to be, convinced of otherwise and see things from another perspective and have evidence introduced to change my mind.
I think a part of that is we've become much more tribal. Like our tribe is, and we're prepared to back our tribe over perhaps evidence or answers coming from the other side. I wrote a piece in the middle of last decade called Intelligent Debate versus Ideology, which kind of just posed the question, does anybody really think they're right 100% of the time? Because an ideologue always has the answer. Now, we also acknowledge that we're not right 100% of the time. That means the ideologue must be wrong some of the times. Maybe this is the time you're wrong. Maybe this is the time I'm wrong, but maybe this is the time you're wrong with your ideology, your zealot-fueled ideology. Because I think if you ask that question, are you right 100% of the time? No honest person is going to say yes. So
but
it's a similar...
as a group, as a collective, we really reward people who do say yes. Like, we really revere people who have an absolute strength of their convictions, and people who will just very courageous is probably the wrong word, very boldly go about life just going, nah, I'm actually 100% confident. I've got this right. I've absolutely got this right. We like that. I think probably because we can outsource our trust into that. We can go, oh, cool, that person's taking care of it. Sweet. I don't have to worry or think about that thing because that person's super confident they've got the right answer.
Yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think you're probably right as well. And you see that with, who are considered by society to be the successful people. I don't know. I wonder, like, is there a difference between being successful and being authentic? Like, I think about authentic people. They're the kinds of people I'd like to have around me and the kinds of people I would look to get answers from. They might not be always the people who have the right answer, So I guess maybe that comes back again to us as a society. So, okay, we give person X sort of kudos for always being right. We put them on the top of the heap, being most successful. Maybe it's about us and what we need to do to find value in other people in something other than having the right answer.
100%.
Like you're saying, humility. I mean, it's an incredible thing to be able to say I'm wrong, or to be able to say, I accept your response. I remember in Talkback, I used to often say to people, and look, I was young and arrogant. I accept that, but the thing I loved most of all was this idea of being able to understand why people believe what they believe. And I used to kind of prod them to go one step deeper. Why do you think that? Oh, why do you think that? Or why do you think that? And if they could follow a path down and get to a reason of why they got there, I'd be like, oh, cool, I can see how you got there. Don't agree with you, but I can see how you got there. Whereas if they're just like, this is the answer, why? And it's because they've read it in a paper and they've just taken that opinion, or they've heard it from television from their political person, or they've heard it in a church from their minister, or whatever it is. If you prod once or twice and they can't go any deeper, it's hard to respect that without being arrogant yourself and saying you have all the answers.
I've thought a lot about this kind of thing recently, and let me put this question to you. Do you reckon that all beliefs that you hold, when you keep asking that question why, ultimately come down to a value that you hold? Because I feel like you could construct there is now so much data and information and perspectives out there that you can really cherry pick and build your own perspective, and there's enough grab bag of stuff that you can do to put that together and make a cohesive worldview for even something like a flat earth perspective. There's enough iconic people who you can revere as heroes. There's enough literature so that you can say, I'm trusting this book. There's enough stuff to construct that view. So what I hypothesize is that it all comes down to like what you fundamentally probably think about humans, what you believe about humans, and everything kind of gets stacked on top of that. Do you reckon there's anything to that?
I think there probably is, but I think that then comes back to we're all capable of that motivated cognition that we talked about before. Because if what you're saying is I'm paraphrasing what you're saying, tell me if it's right or wrong. We take the information, we take the evidence, we add our own bias to it, and we then spit out how we think it applies. Then that means we're getting to the answer ourselves. As you're talking about it, I think you're probably right. And I think there's lots of examples that you are right, but then there are other examples where there are black and whites in the world, for whatever it might be. And those areas where there's black and whites, if you find a way to an answer because of your moral position, your personal position, your ideology, then you're just being deluded and fooling yourself. yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I was just having a look
I'm
here.
not even necessarily, I'm not making a value judgment on it in terms of that all beliefs are equal, because I don't think they are. I think there's a lot of ways that you can measure them, but I don't think they're all equal. But I think just the way that you get to a belief, ultimately, when you track it back, they're all based on sort of values that you have, because values can't really be proved or disproved.
I think you have to be humble and brave to get to a conclusion that's outside your values that you still believe to be correct.
Yeah.
Is it Casey? Casey says scientists thought the sun revolved around the earth until Galileo came along and corrected them, but not before they ridiculed Galileo and labeled him a heretic. I think the thing about that kind of idea of saying, well, we should question the scientists because look, they've been wrong before. Yeah, but it still typically is the best evidence we have, and they keep checking it up. And then when they realize they're wrong, they correct it. That's that's the thing in the world of science, is they will give us the best evidence. And we've seen it in this pandemic we've gone through. We have masks, we don't have masks, we are having masks again. That's because at the time they were learning as they went, and they went with what they thought was best. They came to the outcome after 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, or what they think is best, and they went with it. So that's how I trust scientists and sciences. They don't just come up with a conclusion and stick there. They come up with a conclusion and they keep prodding it to see if they can do better.
It is the fundamental function of the scientific method to keep trying to disprove something that we already believe is like its core function. But this kind of, it's interesting, because I guess this goes back to what you were saying earlier. I'm trying to figure out with, say, anti-vaxxers, for example. Oh, sorry if I shouldn't say that on a stream, if it gets you I know the algorithms are listening to that word and don't like it very much.
Anti-vaxxers.
Okay, sweet. You've said it now, so I feel all right about it. I'm trying to figure out how you get to that position. And I'm very interested in a very genuine way, in a very genuine human way, like how those positions get held and how they become so durable. And I suspect it's because they're based on a value which initially goes maybe something like this. I'll give one a go, and I'm basing it on possibly a bit of a stereotype of an anti-vaxxer, but I am in a particular station in life which is not great, and I deserve more than that, and that is because there is someone who has suppressed my position in life. And this probably wouldn't be a conscious thought, but it's like, a value that's rattling around in your subconscious. So you get a very critical mindset to what we would refer to as the elites, or the systems of power that are in there. And part of that structure, I think, is scientists. So if you kind of have this view of the world where you are in life is very unfair, not because of the universe, but literally because people are like working against you, I think it's very easy to continue down that path and suspect that everyone is kind of scamming everyone else, and everyone in this elite structure, including, the predominant scientific view, kind of everything's a bit of a grift and a scam. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the end of where I'm at the moment.
I don't want to oversimplify it, but you've used the example of anti-vaxxers. We talked a bit about this last night. I had a guy called Frank Ritchie on, who's like a media chaplain. He's floating around and he talks to a lot of people. I don't know if you've ever interacted with him. And I just said to him, and I didn't say it like this, so I'm being rude for the sake of brevity. Why are all these nutters Christians? Like why does it seem that scratch an anti-vaxxer, the majority of the time you find a religious belief behind it? So I don't know. I think probably what you're saying is true for some of them, but I actually think, and this comes back to what you were saying before about belief, and there's a belief.
I think it's the same thing. I think you can totally graft that onto a Christian perspective as well, because I think not all, but I would be tempted to say the majority of the Christian community has been butting up against the scientific community, because the scientific community have been saying that core thing that you believe is true about how the universe was created, we have disproven. And they say, fuck you. Why are you attacking us? They say, fuck you? We know this to be true. That doesn't sound very Christian.
They
say, go to hell, scientists. And so I think that immediately establishes a real distrust, or not even a distrust, but like a hatred almost of the scientific community at some level. So I think maybe
competitive at the least.
Yeah.
So if it's
And
not hatred,
again,
there's a competitiveness.
this is not all people who hold a Christian perspective by any stretch, but I think like the Christians you're talking about who have that anti-vax Christian crossover, I suspect would be quite fundamentalist in their views.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's so probably the same sort of thing that you were talking about before when you keep prodding that question saying why, it comes down to a belief or an ideology. Is when you prod that person, eventually they just get to, well, because God, that's their final sort of thing.
So I've tried to do this for myself, right? So because I was like, okay, well, I've been thinking about this a bit. If it all boils down to values, what do I believe? So what am because I think a lot about my political beliefs. What the hell am I basing them on? Like, where have I got this idea from? And when you boil it right down, I think it is based on a value I have, a belief that at our core, I do believe that humans are good. And I think that we're moral creatures. And I think that we actually tend to look after ourselves and each other in our species. And I think we have a desire to look after other creatures as well. And I think that I could find a way more abundant evidence to support that view than not. I think the few people who sit outside the group who are what I would class as antisocial in a scientific way, like they're not for the group, they become very powerful because they hold those views. So we put an undue amount of, we view the species through these exceptional individuals, but they don't represent us as an animal. I think as an animal, if you look at the billions of us that are roaming around the planet at the moment, most of us help the old lady across the street. Most of us, if we've got a bit of spare money in our pocket, wouldn't hesitate to give it to a rough sleeper when we walk past. I think a lot of the problems and pathologies that we see at the moment in society are needs that aren't being met. But again, that's where I think a lot of my political ideology comes from. And that is based on a belief I have that humans are good. I could be wrong. There's that humility thing. So that's the value that I base a lot of my, that's the foundational bit. And then I base all my ideas after that point. If that's wrong, it means basically all my political views are pretty worthless.
I think that I struggle with the term are basically good, because then that becomes relative. I had a conversation with an academic on the podcast in the last couple of weeks, and I think I kind of respectfully to him, and hopefully not sounding like yay me, but I think I kind of threw him for a bit of a curve because we were talking about all the isms, socialism, fascism, feminism, whatever the ism is, capitalism. And I said, it's a very generalized statement, but in general, the most simplistic form of all of those isms is good, and it wants good. What happens is, because people are innately corrupt, they get involved with a lot of those isms and they turn it into utter trash. Meaning the idea of socialism about the society and the community and being as one and being equal, that ultimately is not bad, but put it in the hands of human beings and you always get people who get to the top and become, fascist dictator, so to speak. The idea of capitalism ultimately is not bad. Something, a product in society is better than the rest, and so people gravitate towards it to get it, but then they put their thumb on the scale somehow and they end up bringing up something that's not as good as that product, and they get a subsidy for it, and they start using socialist tactics to help their capitalists, and it ends up getting run by people. And I think in that context, it's the people that kind of cock up the isms or the systems because we have innate flaws in us, as opposed to the systems themselves being terrible. So I don't know how that relates back, because maybe you can ultimately be good, but still be predisposed to cock up, or be predisposed to turn towards, benefiting yourself firstly. But I don't know. The idea that just that term, even that term good, is relative, and what does that mean? You know what I'm saying?
I think I understand what you're saying. And I think I also disagree with it. And I will try to see if I can describe my thought process on this.
Well, I could be wrong. I mean,
I love to hear it. What you are viewing as a corruption of systems that are at their heart trying to do good for the community, however we sort of define how big that group is, I think is partially us holding ourselves to incredibly high standards. We can come up with a lot of examples of subversions of human behavior because we put so much emphasis on them, because it's a really big deal when we fuck up. We talk about Hitler all the time, rightly, and World War II and Nazi Germany and other human atrocities, because they're exceptional to human behavior. They're not the norm. And it is so abhorrent to us when those things happen that we have and I don't want to say like, it's sort of a form of natural justice built into us that is so strong that we want to correct those things, I think, when they happen in our core as a species. And maybe the flaw in what I'm saying is that I'm saying this from a perspective of someone who's in New Zealand in 2021, inhibiting especially the body of a straight white male 34-year-old dude who's had honestly like a pretty fucking charmed life. Like I've had a pretty lovely time so far, and not everyone has. So, how can you have any other perspective but the one that's been formed by your own personal experience? But I just think there's such overwhelming evidence that there is billions of people on this planet, and every day they get in their car and they go to work and they cooperate and work together and complete projects and help each other out and fall in love. And the subversions that we have to those norms are things like murder or violence, and we build whole like systems and apparatus to wipe that stuff out and try and correct it. And I think that is evidence to suggest that, on the whole, humans are good. And I think, again, to reiterate what I said before, a lot of the problems that we see, I think, are needs that aren't being met. And I think one of them, which informs a lot of my politics, is that it's economic in a lot of times, which leads on to vast other problems, especially like things like drug abuse can come quite easily from economic deprivation, not having enough money, being poor, being in poverty is very stressful. People escape from that awful reality of every minute of their lives by getting out of it. That makes total sense to me. But people see it as this moral failing that people get addicted to methamphetamines or what have you. But I think it's just a symptom of another problem. Social disconnection is another one, and I think we're exacerbating that with technology at the moment. So that's a really scary one, because that affects so many of us and is quite indiscriminate about who that affects.
So maybe it's a mixture of this. It's actually kind of dovetailed through this conversation we're talking about. You're talking about we tend to reward people who say yes or say they have the answer all the time, whether they do or they don't. Maybe those are also the people who float to the top of these structures that ultimately are set up for good, who then corrupt it, whereas the people below in the society are mostly good. So maybe what we're seeing is the people who, it's that old saying that if you want to be a politician, it should be the kind of thing that makes sure you are never a politician.
I fully believe that. I want the most reluctant leaders possible. And that's why I have a lot of time, for Jacinda Ardern, because I knew Jacinda for some years before she became leader of the Labour Party, and she had absolutely no desire to be in that position whatsoever. And I think that is a very good place to lead from, to have no leadership ambition.
Yeah. So maybe what we're finding is in this conversation, we are obviously solving the problems of the world tonight in this very casual and relaxed, laid back conversation by the fire.
It took was 2 fireplaces, Pat. That's the mistake people were making. They were only trying to do it over one. You need 2.
I was going to say, you're in your log cabin. You see, I am too. It's my log cabin.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah. So maybe my error, because I could be wrong, is that I was attributing all of those people being corrupt to the socialist or the whatever the ism is, and really it's just the people who are at the top. But then again, that comes back to the responsibility we have in society for whatever leaders we choose to put up there by putting so much value, which brings us back to that word you said again, in people who say they have the answer, whether they do or they don't, and gives us the responsibility of going, you now need to find out if they're correct, if they have the answer or not. Because actually, if it's not for you, mass population voting or electing or, putting forward or whatever, if you don't put those people forward, then they're not going to be the ones up the top to corrupt the system. Very broad brush, I know, but in general.
Yeah, totally. I think that's it. And obviously, if you don't trust anyone in a position of power says, then there's no power, and that's anarchy with a lowercase a, which is not, you can't really solve any problems because then everyone's working very individualistically. Is that a word? Individually.
It is. If it's not, it is now. I'll take it.
In a way that is individualistic. But I'm also quite interested in anarchy with a sort of uppercase A, which is, well, I don't know much about it, but it seems to be a political perspective that is very interested in flattening the structures of power right out, which I think there's something to be said for. Basically more democracy, much more democracy, and smaller units of leadership in groups.
I think that the thing is, there's no fixed answer, and every ideology puts forward this is the best, and the problem is it might be the best for some, but it's never the best for all. And in some areas of life, that flattening of the leadership, the kind of let's have a, for want of a better word, a kind of a communal advance on society. There's that idea, what's that old saying? A camel is a horse designed by committee. And nothing ever gets done when you've got 20 leaders all with the same thing. Sometimes you need that one person to drive the thing through, but that idea completely counteracts or speaks against the idea of flattening the author. So I struggle again to think that, it's a little bit probably like, sometimes you just need a hammer and other times you need a sander, and it doesn't matter how many hammers you've got. If you really need a sander is the only thing that's going to do the job for you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need 10 hammers.
Do you know it's a fantastic example, a real world example for this is climate change. So what is, this is where I struggle a little bit with my fandom for democracy, because I suspect this is a problem which actually requires some sort of global authoritarianism to be effective in some sort of a way. Because I think the problem we've experienced so far is that every country has acted as a unit. And this is what you hear all the time when environmentalists propose that New Zealand should be making more steps to reduce our carbon footprint. And David Seymour will always hit back with, but we constitute so little of the problem. Like we are, even if we did everything, it wouldn't matter because who are we? And I think obviously this applies, on a different scale to different countries, and America and China are the biggest, but even so, they're still viewing themselves as an individual unit going, so you're saying that we have to change our entire economy, take on all of this enormous burden for the sake of people in other countries? That's not our prerogative. So it seems to me that like a sort of more global authoritarian force, considering our timeline on this, is almost what would be needed at this point.
Well, and also following on from that, as you say democracy, I also think of that idea, what's the difference between democracy and mob rule? I mean, mob rule sometimes is the majority of people that might not be the best. And the flip side of that is also true. Sometimes democracy is not the best answer, because sometimes we need to put through what best suits and best affects positively the minority position. I mean,
well, I can tell you though, if you're looking for a genuine answer to that question, it's institutions. So this is why I'm such a big fan of well, in theory, the American idea, because they are a democracy that have got this incredible belief in a constitution, which is this document which does protect the rights of downtrodden individuals. It hasn't enacted it very well, but it puts forward this vision of one that does that. And I think, to answer your question of what is the difference between democracy and mob rule, I think it is the enshrinement of institutions with power and certain red lines that we have to say, no, individuals have a right to these sorts of protections and safeties, and B, we recognize that there are certain people who are getting dicked over at the moment and they require certain things.
You also talked about authoritarian. Sometimes that, like the climate change thing just needs an authoritarian look, which is sort of anti-democratic. But again, I'm like, so let's think about, you know, something that was recent in New Zealand, which was same-sex marriage. I mean, should that have been legal 10 years earlier, just put through under an authoritarian leadership? Although it was a national government, it wouldn't necessarily have happened. But you know what I'm saying? It should have happened sooner, even if it wasn't the quote democratic choice to make. You know, it's so sometimes the democratic way of doing things, the looking at things and what suits best for the whole community, or I mean, for the love of God, cannabis should have been legalized. I don't give a crap what the poll said. You know, people will say that's undemocratic. I don't care. There is nothing to say why it shouldn't have been. But this is an instance where democracy is harming a situation as well.
Of course, and there's countless examples of that, but I guess we have to pick a system that we apply to the whole thing, warts and all, I guess is what it boils down to, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a Winston Churchill quote about this, which I'm going to butcher, but I think it's democracy is the worst political system until you consider all the others.
Yeah, it's like the best one we've got of the terrible lot that there is.
Yeah.
I butchered it better, but that's basically, I know, I was trying to think of it myself as you were kind of alluding to it, but yeah, it's a terrible system, but it's still the best of a bad lot.
And I think that speaks to the, you know, flawed natures of humans. We've gone deep, haven't we, Pat?
Yeah,
but I think we've made some good calls, maybe.
Yeah. Now we just got to get this to the people who need to hear it to solve some problems.
What's going on, dude? This is why I'm on a mission to get more people onto psychedelics.
Yeah, that's what we should have done tonight.
This is how the revolution
happens. Yet?
I did. Do you want to know? I did a comedy show on magic mushrooms a few years ago, like a 1-hour festival solo hour on shrooms. That was a hell of an experience.
I wanted to ask you about your podcast as well. What happens? Do you ever get kickback? So for people, tell people what you like. Give us the elevator pitch as to what your podcast is and what you do.
Got a podcast called The Worst Idea of All Time. Been doing it for over 7 years. Me and my friend Guy Montgomery, we punish ourselves through cinema. So we started off watching and reviewing the same movie once a week, every week for a year. We watched and reviewed Grown Ups 2 52 times in a row. And then we did the same treatment to Sex and the City 2 and Sex and the City 1. And a Zac Efron movie called We Are Your Friends. And this season, we're actually watching all of the Emmanuel softcore pornos and reviewing all of them. And that's what we do.
So do you ever get kickback from people who like the movie that you are watching because it's the worst movie in the world?
No.
Never.
But also, we have never claimed to be watching the worst movie in the world, because that would actually be too fun. Our podcast, the punishment is always on us. So like the whole thing with Grown Ups 2, Sex and the City 2, Where Are Your Friends? The thing that makes them so fucking painful to watch on repeated viewings is their mediocrity. If they were really bad, it would be more fun for us.
Right.
There's a movie that you probably have heard of called The Room, which I've actually seen voluntarily many times, because it's kind of known, you know, as potentially the worst movie ever made. Yeah. And it's hilariously bad. It's enjoyably bad. But, you know,
if people want an introduction to that, James Franco did a movie which was The Making of The Room. And they'd made a movie about the making of the worst film of all times. What do you think of Grown Ups 1, the first Grown Ups? Is it as bad?
I've only seen it once, but funnily enough, I did a podcast just before chatting to you with two dudes in England. And I watched Grown Ups 2 for that podcast for the first time in about 6 years. And so we had a big discussion about Grown Ups 2 and Grown Ups 1. I've only seen Grown Ups 1 once, and it was a long time ago when we were doing it that season. That movie is way better because it's actually got a point. There's actually like a plot and a reason that all the guys are hanging out. And the second one is just 5 middle-aged men have a day together in a suburb.
Yeah, with Shaquille O'Neal. That's the big problem, is when you
With
see Shaquille
Shaq.
O'Neal pop up in there, you know that this doesn't really have much of a storyline. It's just, although, you know, credit where credit's due to Mr. Sandler, he basically gets his 5 to 10 best mates together, finds a lovely place to film a movie over summer and goes and has a holiday, you know, and then makes $100 million out of the movie.
Here's what I've learned about Adam Sandler, because we became magnets for information about him. It is now my belief that he is supporting a lot of families in America, because every time he spins up one of these movies, and he's doing shit, at some points he's doing like 6 or 8, his production company, 6 or 8 movies a year. He spins these up. I think he's got a whole team of people who just work on these Happy Madison production films. And it's, you know, editors, sound designers, costume people, makeup artists, grips, camera ops, all of these people getting paid, putting food on the table, supporting their families, because Adam Sandler has figured out how to build this machine and keep working it. And I've got respect for that.
And
I don't really care about the films.
People who come and watch his films watch for a reason. They know what they're doing. What did you think of Uncut Gems?
Loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Amazing, eh?
Yeah, I want to watch it again now. Actually, I think it's been enough time that I could watch it again now.
Very cool. Hey, well, listen, it's been interesting. It's been fun. Always is, Tim. I think that we could probably do this once a month for an hour at a time. It seems pretty easy to have these conversations. When's the baby due?
16th of September.
When's the house due?
The house? Oh, the house that I'm building? Yeah. Dude, honestly, I reckon 2023. It's not going well.
So they're not, because of level 4, they're not doing anything with it?
But there's like whole things that need to happen even before they start the bit that starts the bit that starts a bit that then can kick off the house build. It's, yeah.
All right. So baby comes home to rental property to start with.
And we'll spend at least, I would say, probably the first year or 2 of its life, which is fine. I don't have a big issue with that.
Do you have like one thing in the back of your brain that you kind of go, I'm quite excited about with the baby coming?
Dude, I'm excited about the whole thing. Genuinely, I'm excited to be a dad. It's going to be cool. I'm looking forward to it.
What about the flip side? What about freaked out, nervous?
Look, the sleep thing does make me a little bit nervous, because it is literally the easiest way to torture people, and most effective way is to deprive them of sleep. And obviously it's what every parent will tell you is the hardest bit. So that's probably not going to be a lot of fun, but you just got to take each day as it comes, don't you?
Look, I'll say this to you as well. Someone like yourself who obviously doesn't work regular hours, I would say that, I mean, I was in a similar position doing breakfast radio at the time of my first not working regular hours. I would say one thing, I think for someone like you, someone who doesn't have a 9 to 5 per se, you will be able to find sleep. Because normally what happens is, even if you have a terrible night or a terrible day or whatever, when I say terrible, you know what I mean, a bad crying, then they'll crash for 4 or 5 or 6 hours somewhere at some time. And that's the difference between, in my opinion, between 1 child and 2 children. When you have 1, you typically can find space and time to catch up on that sleep, to get that sleep, to figure out a way to rest. When you have a second one, there's no gaps, because the 2-year-old's up all the time and the 1-year-old has a bad night. That's a lot. I personally found that a lot harder to go from 1 to 2 than from 2 to 3. Because
just have one kid. Roger that. I hear you.
I'm not giving you any advice. But I think you'll be right, bro. And I think that you'll, even though you're talking about not doing, maybe you'll learn how to do afternoon naps when you've been up for 23 straight hours. Maybe it will come.
Can I'll tell you what my secret weapon is. My wife is exceptional. She is an incredibly capable human being and very smart. So that's probably the reason why I'm not freaked out. If something happens to her, I'll be worried. If it comes down to just me having to suss this out, then we've got problems. But she is an exceptionally capable person. So that's probably why I'm a little bit more laxed than maybe I should be.
Cool, man. Hey, listen, let's also just acknowledge like Kim and Trish and Andrea and Rig and Jezza, and there's a whole bunch of people in the chat going on. There's a Glenn there as well, I think. And because what we were doing from the start, what we see from the start, is we're kind of just hanging out, it's almost like giving people some other voices in their house at night time, when this kind of weird and uncertain time that we all come together. So a bunch of the people, they weren't even listening to us. If you ever look at the chat there, Tim. They're just talking to each
They-
other.
They took the flat earth thing and they ran with it. I've been following it along. But can I also say this? To that end, I have been doing a live streaming show during lockdown, which I'm doing once every couple of days, called Happening. And if you want to check out the back episodes and see that, it's basically me just making like a art comedy live stream for an hour. We play silly games, we have guests on, we play music. It's fun. It's a fun, chill hang to just take your mind off of things. And you can find that at happeningshow.com.
Cool. So every couple of days, people can come check you out there. Happeningshow.com.
And all the back episodes are there too, so you can check out those.
Well, it's been, as always, an absolute pleasure, Tim. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Back at
coming
Japan.
up.
Thanks for having
And
me.
I appreciate the new decor in the house. I'm surprised that the landlord let you kind of remodel the whole place to look like a log cabin. But these days, I guess it's lockdown. He can't come and check it out, can he?
No, Labor changed the laws, so you're allowed to install a wood fire cabin inside your rental now. That's just what you're allowed to do as a renter.
All right, dude. Hey, all the best. Stay safe in lockdown. You being in Auckland, obviously, compared to those of us 1,500 kilometers away, probably have a bit more to be extra careful with. So be as careful as you can to you and your whānau. And we'll keep an eye out for happeningshow.com. Is that right? Happeningshow.com.
Happeningshow.com. You got it.
Thanks for coming on. And goodbye to everyone.
Pleasure.
Good night. Have a good night's sleep, you guys.